All right. Excellent. Hey, everybody. My name is Nathan Smith, and I'm the Digital Programming Coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. Thanks so much for joining me today for Microsoft Word Part 2. A few quick preliminary things to get out of the way here before we get things rolling. First of all, there's always tons of cool stuff happening around the library, and especially virtual programs right now. So make sure you take a look at cals.org and see what else going on, because there's lots of cool stuff happening, and and wouldn't want you to miss anything awesome. Let's see. The other big thing that I like to say before we start a class, I always like to make sure that folks know, if you have questions, please speak up and let me know. Don't worry about if it seems like sort of a silly question or something that could be obvious to me or whatever. I'm not worried about that. The important thing to me is that if you have a question, it gets answered. So if you have a question, let me know. The way you'll do that, if you're here in Zoom with me, what you'll want to do, if you're on a computer, is head down to the bottom of your Zoom window, click on the little speech bubble that says chat. That'll open up the chat, usually out to the side. And you can send me a message there. If you are joining me in Zoom on a mobile device, tap the middle of the screen, look for more in the corner, tap on that, and then tap chat in that menu, and that'll get you there. If you are looking for or if you are joining me via live stream, if you're on Facebook, look over to the side or down below if you're on a mobile device for the live chat area and put your questions in there. And if you're joining me on Facebook, just use the comments like you would on any other post on all of Facebook. And any of those ways that you ask will get the question to me, and I'll be able to make sure that it gets tackled. The important thing to me about a technology class is that you learn useful things about technology. So if you're learning something useful about technology, then things are going well. And if you are getting confused or you're not understanding what I'm saying, things are not going so well. So I want to make sure that that we have a successful class, and by that I mean you walk away having learned something useful. So ask those questions. Also, if there are technical difficulties, let me know about that too, because if my mic goes out, or if my camera goes out, or if my screen share freezes up or something, then that's going to waste some of our class time, and I want us to get the most out of it. So let me know as soon as as soon as you spot any technical difficulties. The same way, just put it in the chat or comments, depending on where you're joining me from. All right, that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and fire up the screen sharing, and I'm going to reposition my desk a little bit, actually. So give me just a moment. I'm going to switch over, and then you will see my face in just a moment. Here we go. There's Word. All right, there we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So Today's class is Microsoft Word Part 1, the basics. One thing about this to mention is that you want to make sure that you are so this is part 1 of a 2-part little course. Now, of course, if you if you just want to learn the very, very basics of using Word, then it's this class is fine on its own. But if you if you want to get the most out of it, I will be doing part 2 tomorrow, the same time, 2 to 3:30. So feel free to join me for that, and it'll be great. One other thing to mention is if you are if you have a different version of Word than I do, don't worry about that. I am using the Microsoft Office 365 version of Word, but if you're not using that, it's no big deal. That's not going to affect your ability to follow along at all. Everything that I'm talking about here in the class is going to apply to the newest versions of Word all the way back to, I would say, at least Word, 2010 or so, and maybe even earlier. So if you don't worry at all if you have a different version of Word on your computer. That's not going to be a problem. Okay, so when we first open Word up, we're going to get something like this, sort of a kind of a home screen or a start screen for Word that we can use to go a bunch of different places. So one of the places that we can go is down here at the bottom, where we have a list of recent documents. So if you've had other documents open on Word before on this computer or in your Microsoft account, then they're going to be listed here in this list. So you can just jump right back into them. And that's really super handy. If you have a if you want, you can also use one of these options over here. There's the new option there, which will take you to kind of an expanded version of this, which we'll talk about in a sec, or open, which will allow you to essentially browse around on your computer and look for a file that's stored there that you might want to work with. And then up at the top here, we have a bunch of different options for new documents. So there's the blank document here, and we'll be using that momentarily. And then there are all these other documents, except for this. It says welcome to Word, which is kind of a little, like a little show you around type thing. The rest of these are what we call templates. Basically, they're sort of pre-designed documents that allow you to basically take out whatever whatever people have written and put in your own stuff. So this one, for example, is called Blue Gray Resume, and it's got all this sort of placeholder content, a picture of a person here. There's a thing that says name here, and then there's a list of some fake information. And basically, you just replace that with your picture, your name, and not so blank information. Although, to be honest, I'm not sure that putting your picture on the resume is the best way to go with that, but your mileage may vary, I suppose. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to click on where it says blank document here, and that'll open up a blank document for us. Okay, so here in the blank document, what we've got is, we have our blank page here in the middle, And then what I want to do next is spend just a few minutes talking about the layout here. So that way we can get a feel for where things are. And when I say like, look in such and such a place or click this, then you're not going to be completely lost as to what I'm talking about. In addition to seeing it, you will have heard where those options are on the screen. So let's do that. What I'm going to do first is, what we're going to talk about first is up here at the top, this quick access toolbar is what it's called. The quick access toolbar basically has your has a few different options. We've got we have this auto save feature here. Now, depending on what version of Word you're using, you may or may not have this showing up at all. If you do have a newer version of Word, I believe 2016 and onward, this will show up, but it's probably going to be, excuse me, it's after lunch, y'all. It's probably going to be turned to off, and that's okay. What this does is if your document is stored online somewhere, well, specifically somewhere that's controlled by Microsoft, so either in Microsoft OneDrive or in on a Microsoft SharePoint site, usually those are for work. If it's stored somewhere like that, then you're going to get this autosave is going to be turned on, and you can just turn it off if you want to disable it. But as long as you leave it on, your work is going to be saved as you go along. Next to that autosave option is that can be kind of a double-edged sword. If you are working with the autosave on, then you don't have to worry about, say, a power outage turning your computer off in the middle of your work, or your laptop battery dying, or something, or like Word crashing in the middle of writing a document. Oh my goodness, excuse me. So you won't have to worry about those things. But on the other hand, if autosave is on, then your document is going to continually, it's going to continue to save, whenever you pause in your work, or every so often as you're working. And that can actually create a little bit of frustration sometimes, because if you make several changes and then you're like, well, I really want the document to go back to the way it was, then it's slightly harder to do that. If it's not auto-saving, then you can just get out of Word and come back in, open up your document again, and it'll be back to whatever the version of it was before you started to make, the last time that you saved. So that's usually not a huge deal either way, but and there are ways to recover that, but I just want you to be aware of this. If the autosave feature is off, or even if it's on, next to it, you'll have this save button right here. And if you don't have autosave turned on, then you definitely want to make sure that you are saving your work regularly. And that's because of the types of things that I just mentioned, the possibility of power outages, or Word crashing, or different things like that. There are a lot of things that could potentially happen. Maybe you just accidentally close the window or whatever. There are a lot of things that could happen that could potentially cause you to lose your work. And so you want to just get in the habit of, as you're working, clicking the save button fairly regularly. If you click it right now, since we opened up a blank document, what it's going to do is actually trigger the save as feature. If I click here, it'll pop up. It says save this file, and then it's going to give me a little placeholder file name, which I could change to, I'll just call it demo or something. And then I can, and then down here, I can, as it says, choose a location. So if I click here, I can go navigate to various places, such as the documents folder. Click on that, and I'll click save. And that will essentially what the save as function is doing is, excuse me, it wants you to choose what you're going to name your file and where you're going to put it on your computer. Once you've done that, you'll notice now it says demo.docx, save to this PC. And if I click save, it's going to update the existing document with any changes I've made since the last time I saved, rather than prompting me to rename the file again and so on and so forth. So make sure you use the save button regularly. When you click it, once you've named your document, you won't really see much of anything happen when you click the save button, but something important is happening. Your work is being saved, and you are you're helping to avoid having to redo things later on. Okay, so next to that is the undo and redo and repeat buttons. So let's start with the undo button. The undo button, it's kind of grayed out right now. You can't really use it because I haven't made any changes to my document yet. But once I start making changes to my document, this button is going to light up. It's a little arrow that's curving off to the right, or excuse me, that's curving off to the left. And when you click on it, it will undo whatever the last action was that you took. If you deleted a sentence that you intended to keep, you can click the undo button and bring it back without having to retype it. If you change the color of some text and you want to change it back, hit the undo button. It will change it back to what it was before. So basically, if you make a mistake, it's a way to just do a little time travel and go back and fix it without having to remember exactly the way things were or get them configured exactly right. You're just setting it back the way it was before, which is really super handy. Next, this undo button, also you have a little drop down arrow. If you click on that, it'll actually give you a list of the steps you've taken so that you can undo more steps. Now, of course, you can also just undo more steps by clicking the button more times. So let's say I made 3 mistakes then I can click the undo button 3 times and it will go back to the way it was before I made any of those 3 changes. Excuse me. It goes back in reverse chronological order. So it changes the most recent thing, the second most recent thing, the third most recent thing, and then so on. But let's say I get a little overexcited. I'm like, oh no, I made a huge mistake, and I should click the undo button 3 times, but I accidentally clicked it 5 times, and so I've undone some work I want to keep. That's where the redo button comes in. The redo button undoes your undoing. So it'll look just like, rather than what's here right now, this little circular arrow, which we'll talk about in a second, the redo button looks just like the undo button, but a mirror image, and it will step essentially forward in time and undo the things that you undid. So if I hit the undo button 5 times when I should have hit it 3 times, if I hit the redo button twice, then I'm good to go. So that's the redo button, though, will only show up as the next, or it will only be available as the next action after you undo. So if you hit undo 1 or more times, then the redo button becomes available. But if you hit undo and then you make some other changes to your document, then the redo button is replaced by the repeat button. And the repeat button basically just redoes the thing that you did, like repeats the thing that you just did, as many times as you want. So if you changed some text to be blue, let's say, then you can go down, select some other text and change it to the same color blue, and so on and so forth. So the repeat button will allow you to do one action over and over again, or just once again, or whatever. So that's really handy as well. But the redo button, as I said, is only available when you use your, is only available after you've hit undo. So if you've hit undo, particularly if you hit undo multiple times, just look over your work really quick and make sure that you didn't undo any work you intended to keep. If you did, then just hit redo so that you, and get it back to the way you wanted it to be. If you didn't undo, if it looks the way you expected it to look, then you can move on and keep working on your document. Otherwise, if you realize that you undid some work you intended to keep too late, well, it is too late, and then you'll have to just manually redo it, basically. Okay, so the quick access toolbar has those options there by default. If I click this arrow, then I can see a menu, a little list here of other options that I could also add if I wanted to. Or if I click more commands, then I can use pretty much, I can add pretty much any option in all of Word to this quick access toolbar. So if there's something that you find yourself hunting for a lot as you're using Word, that's a really good place. And then you might consider putting that option or that command, as Microsoft says, at the top in that quick access toolbar. So that way you can find it easily. Okay, so that's the quick access toolbar. We already talked about how the name of the file shows up here at the top. We do have a search bar here, which allows you to search. The biggest thing that it allows you to do is to search for particular topics in the help, so that if you're like, I don't know how I would do X, then you can search for it. Down below, though, is an area known as the ribbon. The ribbon is a design concept that Microsoft likes a lot. They've used it a lot. I find it helpful as well. It makes it just a little easier to navigate. So if an analogy that I like to use is, if you think about somewhere they use a lot of tools like a mechanic's shop or a woodworking shop, or places like that where there are a ton of tools around. When you have a lot of tools, obviously you can end up with a big old pile of tools, and then you just have to dig through them all in order to find the tool that you need. And that could be a real hassle, and it could really slow work down, when you're constantly working with those tools. So what the ribbon does, I like to think of it kind of like one of those big tool chests with a bunch of drawers on it. So, you've got a drawer for the wrenches and a drawer for the screwdrivers and a drawer for the ratchets and so on and so forth. And so the person who's using the tools, rather than having to dig through a big pile of every tool they've ever owned, they can just go over to the tool chest, pull out the drawer they need, or pull out the drawer that has the tool they need, grab that tool, close up the drawer, and head back, and get straight back to work. So it's really helpful in terms of, so the ribbon is kind of the same thing for the tools, the commands that we have here in Word. Basically, they're organized by the type of thing that they do. So there's the Home tab right here, which is where we are right now. And you can tell because it's underlined. In some other versions of Word, it might be highlighted in different colors or things like that. But the Home tab contains tools that we use very frequently when we're working inside of Word. So we'll talk about a lot of these tools here in just a little while, during today's class. Next to the Home tab is the Insert tab. And the Insert tab, you may not be shocked to learn, contains commands that are useful for inserting things into your document. So things like a picture or a table, stuff like that, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. There's a Draw tab here. This is kind of new, but you can use this to kind of draw different shapes and stuff, or highlighting and stuff on here. We're not going to cover that, and that's as I said, very new. So most folks, if you're using an earlier version of Word, won't have those options. The Design tab here gives you tools for changing the look of your document. We're going to talk a lot about that tomorrow in Word Part 2. So if you're interested in making your document look all nice and polished and pretty, then come on back tomorrow for Part 2 as well. The Layout tab here contains some things like your page margins, the orientation, the size of the page, columns, which we'll talk about briefly toward the end of today's session. Orientation, by the way, is whether your page is essentially with the long way this way or the long way this way, portrait or landscape. And things like spacing and indentation. The References tab allows you to cite your sources when you're writing nonfiction work. Obviously, that's super duper important because you do not want to, I was going to say you don't want to be accused of plagiarism, but you don't want to do plagiarism. Plagiarism is bad. But you certainly don't want to be accused of it either. So the References tab helps you out there so you can cite sources and give credit where credit is due. The Mailings tab here contains tools that allow you primarily to do what's called a mail merge. A mail merge is taking a list of recipients for a letter or some other sort of document and putting their information into the document in a way that personalizes a copy for each recipient. And that's pretty cool. That's something that we're going to talk about tomorrow in Part 2 as well. So I don't know. It's really awesome. I definitely recommend mail merges, and I'll tell you all about it tomorrow. The Review tab here contains tools for checking your work and collaborating with other people. We'll talk about that tomorrow as well. The View tab contains, options that change how you're seeing your document without actually changing the content of it. So there's things like zoom, and there's the different views where you can see, like, for instance, the print layout here is what we're looking at. That's kind of the default view. You have something called the web layout, where basically you're seeing, you're just seeing a big white space, and you can sort of keep typing, and depending on what size word window you have, your page, essentially your page will look like a different size. It's designed for basically documents that you won't necessarily be printing out. You'll just be posting the content on the web or putting it in an email, things like that. And so that allows you to not worry about things like margins and so forth. So there's a bunch of other stuff there as well. There's a Help tab where you can get help. I know that's a real mind bender, but it's true. And then there's this on mine, there's this Acrobat tab. The Acrobat tab is because I have Adobe Acrobat installed on my computer. If you don't have that, then you're not going to see this, and don't worry about it because we're going to just pretend that doesn't exist for this class. Over here on the left-hand side is the File tab. If I click on that, then it takes me to a familiar screen. Most of this we saw on that opening screen when we first opened Word up. But then over here on the left, we have some other options that we didn't have before. The info option here basically gives me information about my document, and who created it, when it was created, and helps me kind of do things like, for instance, locking the document up with the password or encryption if I need to, inspecting the document for issues like information that I might not intend to have out there that could be out there if I send someone the file. The version history. So if you've got autosave enabled, that's particularly important. And also, this allows you to check for accessibility issues. So if somebody if somebody can't see your document to read it, they may be trying to use screen reader software or things like that to read your document, and you want to make sure that that they have that the contents of your document are accessible to the people who need to access it. So so you've got this inspect document option here. We have save and save as, which we talked about. Mine has save as Adobe PDF, but of course you probably won't have that unless you have Acrobat Pro on your computer. There's print. There's share, which is basically sending your document to other people online. There's export. I will click on that just briefly. So the export option here, again, I have an extra Adobe option here, but we have this create PDF/XPS. That'll be the top option in a normal Word configuration. And it is really useful to have this option built into Word. So when you send someone a document as a Word file, if you've changed things like colors or fonts or font sizes, things like that, depending on the version of Word they're using, depending on what kind of device they're using to look at your document, you might, the person that you're sending it to may or may not be able to actually open the document. And so you want to make sure that you are, that you're giving them a good chance to open the document. And also you want to make sure that when that the document you created is the document that they received. So if they have an older version of Word or something like that, they might be able to open the document, but then it might not look exactly the same. Maybe they don't have the same fonts installed in their computer or something like that. If that's the case, then your document that you spent time preparing and making sure it looked good might end up having a problem. So you don't want, you want to, particularly if you're doing something like applying for a job, you want to put your best foot forward. You want to give them some, give them a document that they will be able to see and that will reflect well on you. So if you're writing something like that and you're concerned that maybe the person on the other end might not be able to open it, or you're sending your resume somewhere, the best thing to do a lot of times is to, once you've got your document the way you want it, go in here, click on export and click create PDF/XPS and create a PDF version of the file. It can be opened by almost any device with a screen, and it'll look pretty much exactly the same on all of those devices, even down to like, your old school Kindle with a black and white screen. So if you're doing something like a resume, that's a really good technique to have in your pocket, is sending distributing that as a PDF rather than as the Word file itself. There's this transform, which you can kind of like change the document to make it look, change the document and turn it into a Microsoft Sway web page or presentation, which we won't be dealing with. And then don't click it, but there's close down here, which will close the document you're working on without closing Word. You also have your options down here at the bottom, which allows you to change the default settings in Word, which of course can be useful sometimes. To get out of this without changing anything, I'm going to click the little left arrow up here at the top. Okay, so down here at the bottom, we've got our page and we've got our kind of working area here, depending on how you have your settings. You may also have, if you go into view here, if you click ruler, you can also see the size of the page and where you are on the page. That can be helpful sometimes. And down here at the bottom is a little slider where you can zoom in and out. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit by just dragging this slider to the right. I'll just make it an even 200. That's good. So that'll zoom it in. It'll make it easier to see what we're doing. I'm going to click back over to the Home tab, and just to get ready, because we're going to be using these tools up here in a moment. But first, I'm going to write some text in my document, so that way we have some text to play around with. Okay, cool. So I've written a paragraph of nonsense here. It's looking good. One thing to point out, of course, for folks that haven't used Word before, is of course that when we get to the edge of or when we get to the right-hand margin of our page, our text automatically kind of moves on down to the left-hand side of the next line, so that way, so we don't have to worry about inserting extra, pressing enter to go down to the next line. It'll do it automatically. And in fact, the only time we want to hit enter really is if we need a new line before we get to the end of the last one. For example, if we're writing a new paragraph. All right, excellent. So we've got our paragraph here and our other paragraph over here. Let's go ahead and play around with some of the settings here. So first of all, I'm going to start by selecting some text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my mouse to where I want to be. I'm just going to get this last sentence of what I wrote. By the way, you don't have to write everything that I've got here. It's not going to be super duper important that you write the same thing. You just want to have some text to play around with on your screen if you're following along. So I'm going to select this text. Now, in technology, when we talk about selecting something, we're really just saying like, pick that thing, or, designate that thing as the thing I want to work on, basically. So to select the text, what I'm going to do is take my mouse, move it down here. I've got this little blinking line here that's called the cursor. I'm going to click to put it next to this sentence. And then I'm going to hold down on my mouse button. And while I'm holding it down, move my mouse until I get this kind of shaded and gray here. Once it's shaded like that, I know that that text is selected, and I'm good to go. Okay, so now that I've got it selected, I want to make some changes to the way it looks. First thing I'm going to do is work with the font up here. So it says Calibri and then body in parentheses here. When I click the drop down arrow next to this, You'll notice the little body goes away there. But if you look down here, this one says body and this one says headings. We'll talk more about what that means tomorrow in part 2. But basically, Calibri is the font for most of the text inside my document, and Calibri Light is the font for things like titles and headers and stuff like that. That's probably going to be a little bit larger size. If I come down here, though, I can choose a different font. So there are a whole bunch of different ones that are pre-installed on my computer, and a few that I've added, although actually not a ton, because I just kind of reset my computer not too long ago. I'm going to go for well, I'm just going to choose one near the top. So I'll go with this Arial Rounded MT Bold. And you'll notice now I have this one piece of text that kind of stands out. It's got this rounded font rather than these kind of straight lines. And it looks very different. So it stands out a little bit. And that can be really useful depending on what effect you're going for. Next to that, where it says 11 here, that's the font size. That's the size of the text that I'm working with. 11 point is the standard font size for sort of business things and stuff like that. So if you have so if you're writing sort of a business letter or something fairly formal, then you probably want to go with 11 point as your font size, unless there's a reason, unless there's a specific reason not to. For other stuff, of course, you could use whatever font size you want. But by clicking the little drop-down arrow, I can select a different size from the menu here. So I could go with 24, which makes it quite a bit larger. 72, which makes it a lot larger. Or I could go with something like 8 that makes it noticeably smaller than it was before, back when it was at 11. I can also use sizes in between these. So just because it skips from 28 to 36 doesn't mean I couldn't go with, say, size 30 or 32 if I wanted to. I definitely can. I would just need to click up here and type in 32 and press enter, and that will change the font size to match to be larger, like this. So you can also do that, by the way, with fonts. If you have a particular font that you want to use and you're not, the name, you can start typing it in. So if I click up here, I can start typing, say, time, and then I get Times New Roman. That's what I wanted. So I'll press enter, and it changes it to that font instead. By the way, comparing these two fonts that we have on the screen right now is worth talking about for just a moment. This font here, you'll notice, has all these little flat ends on the sort of sticks of the characters. So you've got these flat tops on top of the W. You've got this little flourish here that comes off the top of the H. You've got these flat parts on the bottom of the H here. If you look at a W over here, you'll notice it doesn't have those extra little frills to it up on the top. And if you look at the H, it doesn't flatten out at the bottom, and it doesn't have that little the little flag on the top there. So obviously these are different fonts in general, and these two fonts are different from each other. But one thing to specifically call out is Times New Roman here is what we call a serifed font. All those little flourishes at the ends of things on these characters are called serifs, whereas Calibri, the font that we're using by default. So it's called a sans serif font. The reason I point this out is a little rule of thumb to make your document more readable. So generally speaking, serif fonts are easier to read on a page. So you'll notice a lot of books in print have use a serif font. So if you pick up one of the many books downstairs or upstairs or across the hall from me here at the library, most of them are going to have serif fonts in them because it's easier for folks to read, particularly if it's something that's long like a novel. On the other hand, sans serif fonts like Calibri are more useful or are more readable on a screen because there's sort of less visual clutter. And so as you're writing your document, it's helpful sometimes to bear in mind where your document is going to end up. Are people mostly going to be reading it on a screen, or are they mostly going to be reading it on paper? Or another way to think of it is, who's your primary audience? Is your primary audience somebody who's going to be reading it on a screen? Or is your primary audience somebody who's going to be reading it on paper, or say, a document that you print out and you give to new hires when they come into your organization, or things like that, that'll end up primarily on paper. So just think about where your document's going to end up, and that can help you choose a font more effectively. So let me reselect the text here again. Okay, we have these a larger A with an up arrow and a smaller A with a down arrow. And this is exactly what you would probably imagine it to be. The larger A with the up arrow makes your text a little larger. Smaller A with the down arrow makes your text a little smaller. And it just goes by the steps that are in this little menu here. This button with the two A's on it, one uppercase and one lowercase, is your capitalization button. If you click on this, you can choose sentence case, where it'll capitalize just the first word or just the first letter of a sentence and nothing else. You can choose lowercase, where it makes everything all lowercase. You can choose uppercase, where everything's all caps. You can choose capitalize each word, which is exactly what it sounds like. And then you can do toggle case, where everything that was lowercase is now uppercase, and everything that was uppercase is now lowercase. So, so if you are working with text that was, say you paste in some text that was written in all caps, but you need it capitalized in a traditional way, or text that was written in all lowercase, but you need it capitalized in a standard way, or you're working with someone who goes a little overboard with the capitals. Sometimes folks do that. Then in all those situations, you'll want to be, or in all those situations, you can use your, you can use this to clean up the capitalization really easily. Of course, you want to double check it. Sometimes proper nouns might not be capitalized correctly if you're using this and stuff. So, so don't just select the whole document, click that button, and then go, okay, I'm good on capitalization. You'll need to check it over, but that's going to save you a lot of the busy work. We'll come back to this A with a little eraser next to it here in a sec. We've got these buttons: bold, italics, underlining, strike through, subscript, and superscript. So for bold and italics, and actually also strike through, subscript, and superscript, everything except underlining, basically, when you have text selected, clicking these buttons will turn that option on. Clicking them again will turn it back off. And the it's hard to tell with this, but subscript and superscript are sort of, well, it's exactly what it looks like. Subscript is like small text that's kind of at the very bottom of the text line. So if I wanted to make this subscript, then it shows up down here that the bottom of these letters is lower than the bottom of these, and it's in a smaller size. And superscript's the same thing, but it's up here at the top. In math, you use that for exponents, and use subscript a lot. Use it for logarithms in math, and you use it for you use it in chemistry also. And Strikethrough, of course, is just text that's crossed out. Your U there, the underlining button, that's also a toggle. So if I click it, it's going to underline the text I have highlighted. Click it again, it's going to underline it. But then there's an arrow, a little drop-down arrow next to it. If I click on that, then I can change the type of underlining that I'm using. So I've got the regular single underline. I could do a double underline. I could do a thick underline. I can do various dotted ones or dashed ones, or even like a wavy one. Whatever I choose there becomes the default. So if I choose the wavy one and I go over here and I select this text and hit the underline button again, click the U rather than the drop down arrow, then it's also going to give me wavy. If I want to switch back to regular, I just click the arrow again and click on the regular one, and that will become the default. Okay, so let's see. We've also got our text effects and typography. If I click on that, I've got a bunch of different presets of how my text could look with special colors and special effects. So this one has a blue shadow behind it, and a white outline around the text, as well as just black lettering. This one is empty, but it has an orange outline and an orange shadow behind it. This one has a little reflection underneath it. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can find here. And you can change those options individually, adding an outline or not, adding a shadow behind the text or not, adding a reflection underneath the text, adding a glow of whatever color around the text, changing number styles, and then there's ligatures and stylistic sets. Ligatures are basically characters that when they're next to each other, they can kind of like link together like this F and I, like that. Or stylistic sets are going to be specific. If you have a specific string of characters, it'll make them look a certain way. And that's something that's built into the font. The fonts can offer that or not, basically. And so if your font supports it and you want to use it, then that's where it is. If not, then no big deal. Okay, we're going to skip over this highlighter for a moment, but we'll come right back to that. This A with the red color swatch underneath it, when I click on that, it's going to turn my text that's selected red. If I click the drop-down arrow next to the A, it's going to give me a drop-down menu where I can choose a different color if I want to. I'll choose this blue. And again, just like with the underlining, that becomes whatever color you chose there becomes the default color. So if I want to change to a different color, so if I want to change some more text to the same color, all I need to do is select that additional text, come up here and click the A, and it'll change right to that other color. Okay, so once we've made some changes here, so I've changed the size of this, I've changed the font, I've underlined some of it. And let's say I've like made a bunch of changes and it just looks like a real mess. What I can do is I can reset this to the default settings here. So what I'm going to do is select the text again. And then I'm going to come up here to the top and click this A with the eraser next to it. When I do that, it gets rid of all that formatting. That's the clear all formatting button. Formatting is basically changing how something looks without changing what its content is. So I took away the underlining, the blue color, it changed the font back to Calibri, the default font, and it changed the size back to 11. So this all matches up with the way that the text looked initially when we first typed it out. And so using this clear all formatting button will get rid of all these types of changes except for one, and that's the highlighter. The highlighter is special because it's designed to do, well, what a highlighter does, which is allow you to pick out certain parts of the text that you want to draw attention to or remember, things like that. So when I click on the highlighter button, then it gives me a version of my cursor here that has a highlighting marker next to it. I'm going to click and drag to select, just like we did before. But because I'm in highlighter mode, when I let go, it highlights the text in yellow rather than just selecting the text and allowing me to edit it. If I want to get out of highlighter mode, I'll click the little highlighter button again. If I click the drop down arrow here, I can choose a different color highlighting if I want. And if I select this, everything else changes, but the highlighting actually doesn't go away. So in order to remove that, I have to go back into highlight mode and select the text again to unhighlight it. I can also do this kind of in a reverse way. If I select some text and then I click the highlighter, it's going to highlight that text and deselect it. And if I select it again, click it, it'll remove the highlighting. So the clear all formatting doesn't get rid of the highlighting, but it gets rid of everything else. So one other thing to note about these settings before we move on is if you make some changes to these settings while you don't have any text selected. So right now I've just got my cursor here and I'm about to type another sentence. If I make a change like, say, turn the text blue, then when I start typing, it's going to use those settings and it's going to keep using that setting until I go up here and change it back or use the clear all formatting on some text as well. So there we go. Cool. So let's go ahead and talk about these paragraph format options as well. So down here, we've got, so up here at the top, we've got a bunch of different things. Let's go ahead and actually start out at the bottom because these are pretty important settings that I definitely want to make sure that we tackle. So wherever your cursor is when you're playing around with these paragraph settings right here, pretty much all of these settings are going to affect that paragraph specifically, or you can select multiple paragraphs and use these settings on all of them. Excuse me. And any future paragraphs that you type are going to have the same settings until you go back up there and change it again. So right now we've got this blue or this button sort of shaded in. It's got these lines that obviously represent text and they're aligned along the left-hand margin. If I click the center button here, then it's going to center my text. So it all sort of sits in the middle. And as you type text on the line, it gradually sort of expands out. Like so. Okay, cool. So we've got that. We also have the line right button. If I click on that, then the paragraph that I'm working with or the paragraphs that I'm working with, if I select them, will align text along the right-hand margin. You can also do what's called justified text. If I click on the justify button, then it looks like it's aligned to the left, but it's not quite. What's happened is the text is actually aligned along the left-hand and right-hand margins of my document. But the spacing between words has been tweaked a little bit so that each line goes exactly up to the right-hand margin, giving it a nice clean look on the side here. The only time that it doesn't change the spacing on a line of a paragraph is on the last line of each paragraph, where it's just that last line is just aligned left. And that way you can tell visually where the paragraph ends. So those are the alignment options here. We've also got some spacing options. So we can change the spacing between lines of text. 1.0 is a strict single space. 1.15 is the default. So you have 15 hundredths of a line's worth of space in between each actual line of text. 1.5 gives you half a line's worth of space between each line of text. 2.0 is your traditional double space. Then there's 2.5, and there's 3.0, which is a triple space. You can also change the options more specifically by clicking this line spacing options setting. And you have add space before paragraph and remove space after paragraph. So by default, Word will add a little bit of space after each paragraph. You can see it here and here. And again, just like the lack of spacing on the last sentence of the paragraphs when they're justified, adding that space serves as a visual cue that we're moving from paragraph to paragraph. This is why you no longer need to, back in the day, if I were, when I first learned to write longer pieces of writing, my teachers all taught me that I should indent the first line of each paragraph to signal that the paragraph was starting. You don't need to do that anymore in the digital world. Instead, Word will automatically signal for your reader that, hey, this is going to be a new paragraph now by using that spacing. But of course, you may need to change that depending on what format of text you need for whatever you're writing. So you can click remove space after paragraph to stop it from adding that space at the end of each paragraph. And you can also add extra space before the paragraphs as well. Okay, let's make some lists here. Now, there are a few options here that I'm not going to get to because they're not all that interesting, really. There's this A to Z sort option. There's this little paint bucket, which adds shading behind a paragraph, color shading. And then this one, which adds borders around a paragraph. We're not going to get into that, but those do exist. Let's talk about lists instead. So let's say I want to make a list. Okay, and I could keep going. I've listed some Star Wars characters, but it doesn't look very good. It kind of looks like I just started writing paragraphs and gave up. It doesn't really stand out as a list, and it's not obvious that that's what I meant it to be. Excuse me. In order to make it look like a list, what I'm going to do is select the text here. And then I'm going to come up here to the top and click on the bullets button right here. And that's going to give you a little bullet point next to each item on the list. And it's going to indent it for you a little bit. And if I want to add extra items to the list, I'll click at the end here. Just press enter. And it adds it in. If I want an item in the middle, then I can just go to the end of the item right before the one that I want and press enter to add in an extra line. Word generates the little bullets and the indentation automatically, so I don't have to worry about that. I can just write my list. If I want to get out of listing mode, all I need to do is hit enter. So it gives me a blank bullet point, and then hit enter again, and it'll drop me back down to to some regular text. If I wanted to create a numbered list instead, I can do that as well. So rather than writing the list out and then selecting it and changing it to be a numbered list, I'm going to start out with a numbered list by clicking the numbering button right here. When I do, it gives me, it indents for me and it gives me number 1. And just by pressing enter each time, I'm able to go down to the next line and get the next number in the numbering sequence as well. If I want to change the look of these, I can come up here, click the drop down arrow next to either the numbering button or the bullets button. If I click the drop down arrow here, then I could change it to say numbering with little parentheses rather than a period, Roman numerals, lettering, lowercase Roman numerals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can change that. You can even define your own styles if you want to. But that makes it easy to change the look in the way that that's written. Similarly here with the bullets, if I click up here on the drop down arrow, I could choose a different bullet character if I want, including whatever this weird thing is. And then I can click define new bullet and I can add pretty much any symbol in any of the fonts on my computer as a bullet in this document. So that's pretty cool. One other thing that you can do is what's called a multi-level list. If I hit enter to add something after breakfast before lunch, I'm going to add a sub item to breakfast. So I'm going to say, so it says 2 right now, but I need this to be a part of breakfast rather than being like brunch or something. So I'm going to hit the tab key over to on the left of my keyboard. And when I do that, it indents a little further and gives me an A here. So I could say like cereal, bagels, eggs, bacon, toast. So I can add items. I could even say like fruit, press enter and then hit tab again. And I could say orange, banana, apple. There we go. Great. So this is like a multi-level list or something like an outline. Obviously, that can be really useful for organizing information in a more systematic kind of way. And again, to get out of here, I can usually just, actually one thing, if I did want to add brunch here, I'll hit enter right here. And then I'm going to hold shift while pressing tab. And that's going to come down a level. So I go back from lowercase Roman numeral 4 to G, press shift tab again. And that brings me up one more level. So now I can put brunch. Great. And then over here, if I want to end the list, if I'm on a top level item like that, then I can just press enter again and it'll great. Okay, cool. So that's lists. That can help you kind of make your list stand out a little bit more and make your document more readable. So there's some other stuff here. You can do indentation if you want. And this thing's kind of cool and sometimes useful. Kind of looks like a backwards P. This is the show and hide paragraph marks or formatting marks. If I click on this, then it's going to give me a bunch of extra characters here. There are these little dots in between words, and the little dots represent spaces. There are these things at the ends of sentence or of paragraphs, and those are paragraph marks. These little arrows represent indentation, and so on and so forth. So if you have these formatting marks turned on, you can see things that are sort of normally invisible about your document. And that can be really, really useful if your document is not acting the way you expect it to. If you're like trying to get some text in this particular spot, but it just won't go, or things like that, you turn on those formatting marks, and then you will hopefully be able to see exactly what's going on and fix the situation. So I'll click that again to turn those off. Okay, let's talk about, let's see. Let's talk about inserting things into our document. So what we can do is we can let's see. So let's drop in a table first. So I'm going to click on the Insert tab up here at the top, press Enter, and start a new line here. And then I'm going to go on the Insert tab up here and click on Table. Now what I can do is move my mouse here and drag around until I get, I don't even have to drag. I can just move my mouse over these boxes until I get the size of table that I want. If I want, let's say 6 columns and, 8 rows or something, then I'll click on this little square right here, and that drops in a table with 6 columns and 8 rows. You'll also notice up at the top, I get a table design tab and a layout tab. Both of those allow me to make changes to the table. For example, on the table design tab, I could change the color scheme. And I can change whether there are borders, whether there are banded rows, which means like rows that sort of alternate in color. Why that's turned on but not actually showing up, I'm not sure. This is a theme that definitely has banded rows. Let's go this one. Let's go with that. Okay, here we go. And then I can start typing inside of my table here. To move from cell to cell, I can just hit the Tab key. Pretty easy. Down here, I can also just click in a cell to start typing there. And so on and so forth. So you can use the layout tab to change things. You can add additional columns or rows. You can delete columns, rows, or the whole table, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Change the alignment of text inside of your table. There are a lot of options there. Now, these tabs will only show up when you're working inside the table. Once I click out of it, now my cursor's down here, those tabs disappear. So I can no longer use those options. And part of that too is if you are, is that these, when I change these options, it only affects this table that I'm working in right now. So if I have 2 different tables, I could go over here to the table design tab, change this one to green and then the other one to pink or something. So that way you can tweak those settings independently of one another. And that's obviously sometimes pretty important to make them stand out from each other. And so, yeah. Okay, so so that's inserting a table. Let's go ahead and drop in a picture as well. Now, we're not going to spend just a ton of time on this because, to be honest with you, Word doesn't handle pictures in like the best way possible. Word is what we call word processing software, which means it's designed for helping you write your document really well and get the text to be exactly the way you want it to be, but it doesn't have the most options or the best setup for dealing with images because it's not really designed for that. But in a pinch, if you need an image or 2 in your document, you can throw it in there in Word. If you're using documents, or if you're creating a document that's more, how to put it, if you're creating a document that's like more of a mix between text and images, then you may want to use other software. If you have Office 365, at least certain versions of it, you'll have access to Microsoft Publisher, and you can use that. And that's a better tool for mixing pictures and videos more directly with each other, or pictures and text, I should say, more directly with each other. There's a free online tool called Canva that's really nice for sort of graphic design type things like that. And you know, a lot of folks, if they're doing it in a fancier, sort of more professional type style, will use Adobe InDesign. So there are a bunch of different things. There are other programs too, but that is but those are some of the common ones. Okay, so let's drop in a picture. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to click on the pictures button here. Now you may, depending on your version of Word, you may have a pictures button and an online pictures button or something like that. Just the regular pictures button, not the online one. This device is what I'm going to click on. The other options we have here in newer versions of Word, you'll have stock images. So these are going to be images that you can use without having to pay for the rights to them, which is pretty important if you're going to be publishing something for the public. You want to make sure you have the rights to use those images. And then online pictures just allows you to search Microsoft's search engine, Bing, for pictures. But of course, you do, as I said, if you're going to be publishing it in some way or distributing it fairly widely, then you want to make sure that you have whatever images you use from there, you want to make sure you have the rights to them. I'm going to click on this device and I'm going to look for a picture that I can use. Which might not actually work super duper well, seeing as how, again, I reset my computer just a second ago. There we go. Okay, I'll try this. This is just a little screenshot I took of an error message from Zoom. I'll click insert. And there it is. There's our little our picture there. Now, the way that Word works with images, I've got my cursor right here. It's really hard to see, but it's right next to the bottom left of this picture. If I start typing something, then it actually shows up here. Ugh, keep scrolling down. And Word actually treats the picture as part of the text. So if I make it a little smaller, that was a little wild. Okay. There we go. Make it a little smaller, then you can see here's the text on the left side of the picture. I can just move my cursor to the other side. In computer terms, we say that this is an inline image. It's an image that's on the same line as the rest of my text. If I don't want the picture to be this way, and to be honest, usually you don't, what I'm going to do is click on it. I'll find it over here, and I've got a few different options. So rather than in line with the text, I can choose one of these text wrapping options. So square, that'll be the text is here, and it kind of like puts a little buffer there, and the text just goes on either side and just kind of flows through it. So it says this is on the left side of the picture. This is on the right side of the picture. And if I kept typing, it would show up here. it basically just kind of flows around it and treats this as though it kind of doesn't exist in a way. And of course, you can move it around if you want to. So I could put it here on the top left of the page, or maybe the right. I could choose tight, which is similar, but essentially gives less room, which hasn't really done anything this time because of the lengths of the words and the spacing. Through, if you have an image with a transparent portion, then through will actually allow text to flow around the edges of the image, the actual part where there's a picture. So if I had a star, like, this little macaroni thing that they've got, you'll notice it has a little gap at the bottom and there's text inside of there. There's top and bottom. That's one that's nice. And that kind of allows you to, and that one just makes sure that any text is either above the picture or below the picture. And then there's behind text and in front of text, which is exactly what it sounds like. Behind text, we'll put it behind your text. In front of text, we'll put it in front of the text so that it just blocks it. And you have the option with any of these text wrapping setups, you either have the option to move the picture with the text or fix the position on page. So usually I choose that if I'm putting an image in Word. And that way I can just drop it where I want it to be and let the text kind of like deal with it, basically. Okay, cool. So we've got that. Let's go ahead and talk about a few other odds and ends that are pretty useful, and then we'll wrap it up. So let me actually make this a little smaller. Just going to move it around a bit. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to select these two paragraphs here. Get in the picture. That's not what I want, but that's okay. Deal with it. Well, let's just move it down. Okay, let's try this. Hey, all right, okay. So I've got my text selected here. What I want to do is I'm going to copy it and paste it some so that we have a bunch of text to work with. So I'm going to right click on it and click copy. And then I'm going to come down here, press enter, and I can either right click and do where it says paste options, and I can choose any of these, almost any of these settings that I want. Keep source formatting, merge formatting, or keep text only. Or the easier way to do this, and the way that I'm going to do it, is with the keyboard. I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard while pressing V as in Victor, Control V. If you're on a Mac, then you'll want to use Command V instead. And that works not just for Word, but almost any program on any computer that supports copy and paste, of course. So I'm going to hold Control while pressing V. V, 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 V. Okay, so we've got plenty of text here. And one thing that I want to point out, first of all, is so I've got this text right here. And, I'm just going to delete this image because I think it's going to mess things up. So I'll click on the image. I'll press delete on my keyboard. And that'll get rid of it. Okay, cool. Okay, so I've got this little paragraph right here. Then this is at the top of the next page. If I start typing here, okay, still not doing exactly what I want. I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of the table too. So I'm going to click on this little deal right here, click delete, and delete table. There we go. Okay, cool. So we've got our text. It's right here. And if I add additional text to a paragraph, well, okay. Let's say that I want this sentence where it says it was a dark and stormy night to be at the beginning of, or at the top of the next page here. In order to do that, most of the time, most people will click next to it and go enter. And sometimes, well, because it's trying to keep sentences or paragraphs from being broken up too much, that just moved it down there. But if I deleted this, let's say I'm editing and I delete this paragraph right here. Now I have a problem because the other paragraph, the one I wanted to start the next page, moved up. So that's no good. So what I want to do is keep this at the top of the next page. The way I'm going to make that happen is I'm going to click next to it here. I'm going to go up to the Insert tab, and I'm going to click Page Break. What that does is it drops this page break right in between these. So if I add extra text here, if I add a little bit of extra text that should sort of push the other down, then it stays there. If I add a lot of extra text so that it flows onto the next page, then it actually pushes this to the top of the following page. So basically, by inserting the page break, I'm saying whatever's right after this is going to be the first thing on the page, whichever page that happens to be. And you can see it if you come up, if I click home and do the formatting marks, you can actually see the page break right there. So that tells you anything that you type on, above this page break is going to stay on the page with all this other stuff. Anything that you type below the page break is going to be at the top of the next page. So that's really handy. That way you don't have to get certain things at the top of the page or at the bottom. You don't have to go enter. And if you add additional text at the beginning, or you get rid of additional text, that's before the text you want to start a page with, you don't have to do a bunch of backspacing and fiddling around with the length of the other stuff. It'll just stop when it stops. And then on the next page, you'll get the thing that you want at the top of the next page. It's pretty useful. You can also do columns. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on columns, and I'm going to change it to 2 right there. What that does is it changes the entire document to 2 columns. I've still got my page break and all this other stuff here, but now everything's in 2 columns. If I undo that, let's say I only want this page to be 2 columns. I'm going to go up here to the top again on the Layout tab, click on Columns and go to More Columns. Change it to 2, and then I'll go Apply to this point forward and click OK. And now from where my cursor was through the rest of the document, it's all columns. If I want to just do a specific section in columns, then I can go select it, columns, more columns, and then down here it already says apply to selected text. And now it creates a column section. You'll notice there's a section break here, and there's a section break here, and that creates the boundaries for the column area. One other thing that I can do if I want, let's say that I want only these 2 paragraphs in this left column and the rest of it on the right. It tries to balance it out in this column section, but rather than doing that, what I actually want it to do is just stop the left column right here. So I'm going to click there, and then I'm going to go to my my Layout tab again. Go to breaks. This is another place where you could put a page break, by the way. And I'm going to do a column break. When I add a column break, it says that's the end of that column, regardless of how long the column is and regardless of how long other columns are on the page. And then the rest of the text stays over there in the right-hand column. And that is pretty much it. What questions do y'all have for me before we wrap it up for today? All right, I don't see anything. So I'll just say thank you so much for joining me for class today. Remember, tomorrow is Microsoft Word Part 2. It builds directly on this. So even if you've never used Word before, you now know enough to proceed to Part 2. So I hope you'll join me for that. There's a lot of cool stuff in Part 2 that I definitely think you'll find useful. And if you do think of additional questions that you have between now and then, feel free to shoot me an email. The email address to use is digital@calus.org. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day. And hopefully I will see you tomorrow.